is I think we all wonder how on earth Melbourne's going to cope with a population of 8 million, which is being forecast, isn't it? Our transport system seems to be overwhelmed now, let alone the cancelled roads and whatever.
2 hour time.
So I'm delighted to welcome Brian Negus and Jeff Cosgris. Many of you know Jeff. Jeff is, apart from being a very fine member of Victoria, he's also a director of the RACV. In an earlier life, he was actually one of my customers, so very good customer too. Most importantly, he was also a board member of Transurban for 9 years. He's kindly invited Brian. Brian is the General Manager of Public Policy at the RACV. Brian is really the voice of the RACV on issues related to improved travel and safety. He was formerly Deputy Director of Public Transport in the Victoria Department of Transport, Metropolitan Regional Director with Vic Roads for 8 years. He's President of the Intelligent Transport Systems Australia. He represents that on the Asia Pacific World Congress Board. So both Brian and Jeff are more than qualified on this subject, and we welcome them. So would you welcome Brian and Jeff?
Thanks, Jeff. When Jeff and Peter said our members would like to hear about what's happening in transport in Melbourne, he said, can you come along in July? And I said, yeah, I'll be happy to do that. And he said, a lot of them are quite expert. And I said, well, if you've got an expert room here, I'm bringing the real expert with me. So that's why Brian's here as well. Nice to see so many members from Victoria Golf Club here and a few of the bike riding group. When Mr. Wilson said, coming to the best course in Melbourne, I couldn't understand why he said Kingston Heath. I think these things happen too. What I thought we'd do today is I'll give you a quick overview of the RACV today. Brian will take you through a number of the major initiatives planned for Melbourne in the transport area. I'll come back and talk about some emerging technologies, and then we'll open it up to questions. That's the format we've got in mind for today. So if we say anything controversial, that'll give you a chance to ask us a question later. We can go to the first slide, which will just give you a quick overview of the RACV today. So while many of you know the RACV Club, we have about 30,000 members in the RACV Club. In terms of service and insurance members, we have about 2.1 million members. So we do have the opportunity to engage with our members, understand what their priorities are right around Victoria, and use that to influence some of the projects and policies that really impact mobility in Melbourne and around Victoria. The business has a number of various lines of business. Most of you would know the roadside service business and the insurance business, but also we have an Intellematics business, which many of you wouldn't know about, but just to give you a quick insight there, the Intellematics business actually creates intellectual property and technology that we then contract to Subaru, Ford, Mercedes, and a lot of other companies for some of the technology and information that comes up on their dashboard, and that's a global deal that we're working on at the moment. So it shows you that technology can be created in Australia and used in the rest of the world. A lot of our activities are around member benefits, making sure that as a mutual we focus on delivering benefits and a growing batch of benefits. As a club and resorts business, we also have a battery business, a finance company, payroll packaging business, so a very diverse company today. Part of our mandate is supporting the communities in which we operate, so most of the areas where we have resorts or activities, we do engage very deeply with the local community and look to put in initiatives and support mechanisms to help improve quality of life in those areas. And of course we have the very important role in terms of influencing public policy and advocacy around mobility. So with that lead-in, we can go into that area, and Brian is the guru on everything to do with road, transport and all the other projects, so I'll come back to you later in the presentation. So welcome to Brian.
Thanks very much, Jeff, and it's a pleasure to see everyone here today. I'm a lowly member of the Rosanna Golf Club out in the North East in the Yarra Valley. I've been there for 30 odd years. I play Victoria, it's a pretty good club.
Not enough hills for Brian.
But sort of tossing up between the Heath and North Melbourne and probably our resort course at Cape Schanck, and of course the National, which the other ones I sort of play pretty regularly. So we're spoiled for choice though, really, in Melbourne in particular. And for those who might have a house down on the peninsula, which I've got one down there, we're certainly spoiled for choice for there. On the double page in Melway, the old sort of style maps, not the telematic style maps, I think there are 12 golf courses near my house, so it's just brilliant. We are spoiled for choice. We'd like to talk to you today about what RACV does in relation to producing our public policy stance. So it's about market research, it's about technical evaluation, it's about policy development, and as Jeff said, it's about advocacy and lobbying, I guess, to government. Be it the federal government with the federal election we've just actually painfully gone through, and the state election last time round. In both situations we had massive campaigns to push particular projects that we wanted. So our market research told us, as on the screen, people value mobility. But they not just want roads, they also want public transport as well, especially if we're going to cope with a population of 8 million, as our chair said. Melbourne is going to have a comprehensive road and public transport system to cope with that. And that's certainly part of RACV's advocacy. A lot of people have actually said, what's the RACV up to about cars and roads? And no, we're not, because our members are not just about cars and roads. Our members say they want roads and public transport to get around. And that's pretty critical. So what we've actually seen out of that is they want a better connected system, they want safer travel and a fairer deal in terms of the cost you pay for motoring, the cost you pay for fuel, issues of fuel excise and such other government taxes, which I'll come back to as we move through the presentation. Someone like to get that?
I've got a bucket of water, put it in there.
So the changing profile of our population. We talked about there being 8 million people in Melbourne, and certainly we're north of 4 already. So that's really sort of on the horizon. But the other sort of situation that we're faced with is an ageing population, and that's really quite clear. You can see the sort of fairly large bulge in that particular graph on the screen, where in fact both from a male and female point of view, we are an ageing community. Our birth rate is not matching sort of the other end, and therefore we are getting a situation where the community is getting older. So that has certain issues about sort of the transport system we need. So the things we've found basically is that the proportion of people over 65 will double up to 2051. The average household size will shrink, and we're seeing it already with a lot more single person households. So as a consequence, more housing need, and we're seeing densification already in central Melbourne and the surrounding suburbs. And so the key is how does this affect our transport services, both in terms of jobs, recreation, and sort of getting to and from those locations. In terms of the road death situation or the road safety situation, fortunately, Victoria's always led the pack fair in Australia, and you can see that on that graph there, the latest stats up to the end of March that we have, so the 12 months up after March. And fortunately, New South Wales, Victoria, Queensland are pretty similar. Northern Territory is way up there in terms of rate. Not a big population in a way, thank God, but they do have an extremely high death rate and extremely high serious casualty rate as well. But deaths are only part of the question. Whilst in Victoria, we currently have each year about 270 to 80 fatalities, and we're up about 19 currently year on year in the situation. We also have around about 20,000 serious injuries. So that's a really critical issue to deal with, because some of those serious injuries can actually be worse in a way with paraplegia and the like than fatalities. But we're in a fairly good situation, but it's never time to be complacent. Congestion's getting worse. So this is the other factor coming in. So what I'm going through here is the main stats that actually impact on what it is we want to do with our transport system. So congestion is getting worse. That's the end of the Eastern Freeway. For those who aren't familiar with it, it's a fair way from here, but it's like that every day for probably 2 or 3 hours in the morning. and the reverse 2 or 3 hours in the evening. So congestion's a key, and certainly congestion on roads and public transport are issues that the community tells us about all the time that they want to actually have addressed. Public transport patronage is increasing. You can see the graphs there. That's from the 2011 predicted through to 2031. And you can see the period through to about now where we've actually got quite significant increases, especially in rail. And the level crossing program certainly is going to have quite an impact on that, both in terms of freeing up road congestion, a bit of angst in the meantime, as you're probably seeing down here on the Frankston line, and also a Dandenong line, but certainly a much needed program, and that will provide the ability for increased train services as well. But also trams and buses are increasing. So that's good news in terms of the distribution of trips to the network. So RACV has had a multimodal focus. Firstly, I want to understand the needs of mobility for Victorians as all types of road users, as I mentioned earlier. Advocating for a balanced, integrated transport plan to improve both safety and mobility is an absolute key. As I said before, the community's clearly told us they want roads and public transport. They need both to get around. Promoting smarter solutions, part of the point that Jeff mentioned before about telematics, and basically transport management, smart integrated travel information, trip planning tools, which I'll talk a little more about as we go through. And fourthly, promoting intelligent transport systems to improve mobility and safety. So firstly, in terms of understanding Victorians' needs, as I mentioned earlier, we've done a lot of market research. We're now talking to the community, both in terms of online market research, of formalised, properly statistically based market research, and also out talking to the community in our shops around the whole of Victoria. And you can see some of the examples of that. We have a Wednesday weigh-in on our website, which actually engages people both through web-based activity, but also through social media, to find out what they think about some of the issues. And also, we've done an on-track survey, which is shown on the top right there. We've got 18,000 participants in the on-track survey telling us about the rail system, what people thought about the rail system, and not surprisingly, the biggest issues were about car parking, crowding on public transport, and level crossings were the three key issues. And that's not surprising, and that's something we'll deal with over time. So advocating for an integrated transport system, RACV published last year our RACV Directions 2015. And that sets out all of the policy planks that we've actually put down in relation to all the issues about roads, about public transport, bicycles, motorcycles, all the modes, but also all the issues about road safety and about affordability. It's important we deal with all of those to make sure we encompass the entire community's needs. If you haven't seen Directions, it's online on the RACV website. And we have, of course, hard copies in the office if you wish to get one of those. But that's really a good document. We've actually distributed that to all the state and federal politicians in Victoria, to all local councils, to advocate our position. Just excuse me, my voice is a bit dodgy. I'll move some water. So moving through some of the projects that we've been pushing forward, on that particular plan is the projects for Melbourne. So the Metro Ring Road completion, Greensborough to Ringwood, is one of the key projects we've always pushed as being a major route. It effectively completes what is an incomplete ring road, which comes to a thundering halt at Greensborough. It's really important to connect that with Eastlink because we've now got a burgeoning freight centre, as you may know, at Dandenong. And a lot of that traffic, that freight traffic, in fact, is trying to get from Dandenong to the Hume Freeway, to the Western Ring Road and the like. And in fact, they're going through what are a lot of local streets in those areas. So that's been number one for some time. The East-West Link, the route that was done by the Andrews government, which we believe was certainly unfortunate. But I guess the comment we got from the Treasurer at Tim Pallas was, it's a good project, Brian, it's just not our priority.
50 years.
But at a cost of $1 billion, you have to wonder. So that's still on our list. We believe it will be moved at some point in time Fortunately, the government's delivering the Western Distributor, which I'll come to as part of the presentation as well, which is the western half of East West, but $1 billion was a pretty unfortunate decision. The Metropolitan Rail Tunnel, we've strongly supported for many, many years. It's number 3 on that plan. And number 5 is the Dandenong Rail Line, which is the great separations and the increase in rail services, which is underway already with the Skyrail, which you've probably read about. And certainly that's been talked about in the context of the Frankston Line, which I'm happy to talk about later if there are questions. And the 4th project is the Melbourne Airport Rail Link. Melbourne Airport is burgeoning with patronage, and already you see massive congestion, especially on Mondays and Fridays, getting to and from the airport, and therefore we're not going to survive without a metropolitan rail link from Southern Cross to the airport into the future. So there are our key metropolitan projects. I should add to those, of course, the 50 level crossings, which the Andrews government has committed to. We think that's a very good project. In fact, about 5 years ago, well prior to the state election, RACV put out a plan to say we want to in fact have an ongoing program to get rid of all level crossings in Melbourne. There's 175 of them in total, which need to be got rid of. And what we said at that time was that we think there should be a program start with 5 a year for the first 10 years. Lo and behold, that's 50. We actually engaged both the Liberal government then and Labor opposition, and Labor in fact picked it up as a policy. So we were pretty successful in getting that on the agenda, and we think that's a really good project. So in terms of some of those key projects, that's our diagrammatic for the Metropolitan Ring Road completion from Greensborough to Ringwood. The main discussion on this has been about, it'll probably be a north-south link coming down sort of parallel to Greensborough Highway in the north and taking over part of that route, diving into a tunnel north of Lower Plenty Road and coming out to on the Bulleen Flats connecting with the Eastern Freeway, and then widening east from Freeway out to the tunnels to connect to Eastlink. That's the most likely route, we think. We've had, fortunately, both the government, state government, and indeed Matthew Guy from the state opposition make positive comments about encompassing that in the next run-up to the election. And we've also had the federal government, Darren Chester, in fact, who's now been reappointed as the minister as of this morning, or as yesterday, but also the Government House this morning. Darren's also been involved in supporting the Metropolitan Ring Road, in fact keeping in money for the business plan preparation subject to the state government matching it, so that's really good news. The Metropolitan Rail Tunnel, Melbourne Metro, as you can see on that plan, effectively links across town from the east to the west, and the main problem there is that the Metropolitan Rail Tunnel, the current underground tunnel in Melbourne, is under capacity. You probably saw there was an article in yesterday's Age by Andrew Lazala, who's head of Metro Trains. In fact, staying at that very point, the Metro Tunnel, in fact, is out of capacity already, and we need a cross-town route to actually supplement that. So that's why that's on our particular list as well. And the Western Distributor I mentioned before, you've probably seen the government's done a deal with Transurban, in fact, to deliver the Western Distributor, which effectively is about 80% of what the original Sir Rod Edington plan was for the East West Link, which he actually put down around sort of 6-7 years ago. And that will deliver quite a significant change on the western side. It will importantly provide an alternative to the Westgate Bridge. And given the area of Wyndham is the largest growing municipality in the whole of Australia, it's pretty important to in fact get something parallel to the Westgate Bridge. So they're the 3 key projects pushed in the state and then the federal election. And we finished up with a situation where the state government's committed to the Western Distributor. They've also committed to the Metropolitan Rail Tunnel. And we've had both the state and federal level commit to basically the Metropolitan Ring Road up at Greensborough. Completion of the business plan and consider that next time round. So we think that's been pretty successful. I was on a plane recently and there was a bunch of coughing kids around me, and so I think I've caught whatever the help they had. So the other point that I wanted to raise this morning was about promoting smarter solutions for transport and integrated travel information. We're seeing that already on our freeway system. For those of you who use the Monash, when you're down the freeways around town, there are now comprehensive freeway management systems. There's ramp metering, in fact, to moderate people coming on each of the ramps. So in fact, the freeway itself doesn't get as much stop-start motoring. We've still got a fair way to go with that. But the important thing is also that there was a situation where incidents can be properly managed. Lanes can be closed via red crosses. And in fact, you can get emergency vehicles into those areas. So that's a really important part of managing smarter networks. We need smarter tools on public transport as well, in terms of smart ticketing. You've probably seen the Myki system is about to be recontracted, and we've been talking to PTV about upgrading that to make it possible to use, for example, your smart card or your mobile phone, in fact, to pay rather than have a Myki card. So that, we hope, is going to come as part of the next generation of Myki. Those smart systems already are available in many parts of the world. There's no reason why they shouldn't be available in Melbourne. I get support on that. And the third part really is about traveller information. We already have Google Maps, and in telematics, in fact, the company that we own, that Jeff mentioned, does in fact get travel time information from the VicRoads traffic signal system, but they're supplemented by private vehicles. And they're doing that in every state of Australia and also overseas, as Jeff mentioned as well, in the US and UK. And that information was also provided to Google Maps under contract, and therefore the travel times you see on Google Maps comes from telematics. That gives you the chance to plan road journeys. If you go onto the PTV app, there's an app available from PTV that tells you about the nearest train, tram or bus service to you. It's a pretty good app. What we haven't got though is the two integrated. So before you leave home, you can put in your origin, destination, and you can get the options available to you. If I drive my car to the station, there's going to be a car park, and I can get from the station to wherever I'm going. I can get, say, Uber at the other end. There's no reason why that seamless service can't be provided. In fact, as part of the World Congress on Intelligent Transport Systems that I'll finish up on later, we in fact are doing a hackathon. We're bringing together the PTV data and the telematics data and the VicRoads data, and in fact we're getting a bunch of university students to come in and actually look at how they can produce such an app, a multimodal travel app. Because they're much better at it than any of us, and it really is going to be an inspiring situation. So smarter solutions, transport tools, integrated travel information is part of what we want to actually achieve. I've probably covered most of that. So you've probably seen Tram Tracker or the PTV app, or indeed if you haven't got the telematics app, that'll be available pretty soon to give you the same information on the road system. And that multimodal travel information is absolutely the key in this situation. So dealing then with the IT solutions, and I wanted to concentrate and lead into to Jeff talking about this area as well, is what automated vehicle systems are here now. We've all been probably reading about driverless cars. Trials that occurred last November in Adelaide. But there are many trials overseas as well about various levels of autonomy. Although we did see a crash or fatality, in fact, overseas recently with a Tesla. I don't know whether people read that, but they were in automated mode and in fact had a crash and someone did in fact get killed. So we've got a fair way to go with that situation. But what we've done in RACV recently is done a fair bit of technical research about the sort of systems that are coming online, and we want to get to a situation where we can actually advocate to governments the things that need to happen, both at a federal and also at a state level, because the industry is racing ahead and governments really are in very much catch-up mode with things like regulations, ethics, legal positions, insurance, you name it. The regulations are of the past, not of the future. And so the research we're doing in this area is to get a feel for what's happening and what we should be advocating. But we're already seeing systems in cars now. For those who've had a more modern vehicle in the sort of last maybe 5 years, you're seeing things like autonomous emergency braking. It in fact brakes the car if you're going to crash into someone in front. we see lane change warning systems, reverse invisibility systems and detection systems, blind spot monitoring, fatigue warning systems, adaptive cruise control. These are in our cars now, and effectively they are various levels of autonomy which are already helping us, particularly with road safety. And we'll see more and more of those coming into the system as new cars come onto the market. So autonomous vehicles, obviously cars that have the ability to drive themselves, they're both inevitable, but they certainly represent a paradigm shift. As I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of issues to be confronted in working out how to actually regulate, control these particular vehicles, and therefore it is going to be very disruptive on the community and on governments to try and deal with it. They do have the potential though to completely eliminate road traffic accidents. So the road safety benefits could be huge, but we will have a mixed vehicle fleet for many years, which I'll come to shortly. And as I mentioned, many legal, ethical hurdles to cross before we get there. And that's something which the National Transport Commission is currently dealing with. They're doing a major inquiry at the moment to look at what's the regulatory framework that's needed, in fact, to control emergency aspects of autonomous vehicles. And that's going to be really important from a government perspective. Nevertheless, they're probably less than 15 years away. So we are going to have a mixed vehicle fleet over time as we get gradual levels of autonomy coming into the system. But within about 15 years, we're going to have a fair number of autonomous vehicles on the roads. That's a fairly complex graph, but it does show you that basically at level 0, we've got all those things I mentioned before. Lane change assist, park distance control, lane departure, and so on. They're currently in the system right now. Level 1, we're getting to active driver assistance, with adaptive cruise control, lane keeping assist, a car that actually, if you go over the white line on a road without actually indicating, it either shakes the steering wheel or gives you some visible or audible warning. They're existing now. So that's level 1, we've already got it here now. And then partial automation of each of those devices will occur in the not too distant future. We then go through conditional automation, where in fact you can invoke, or choose to invoke, or not invoke automation. And high levels of automation will be like what the Tesla's trying to do now, not successfully yet, but it will actually come in the next 5 years. And level 5 is full automation, so basically when you get cyber systems basically setting up your entire car and you're in full automation. As I said, that's probably 15 to 20 years away. So I might swap to Jeff now to talk about some of the issues confronting the motor in the industry and also about some of the disruptive technologies. Yep.
You might just shift to the regulations, because that's what's happening at the moment is most of the, if you like, the advanced players in the autonomous car are companies like Google, who you don't see as a traditional player in the car industry, and Tesla at one end are saying autonomous vehicles will be here and readily available at a commercial proposition within the next 5 to 10 years. And you've got the more traditional players, if you go to their research labs, basically what they'll share with you is they've got all the technology ready, but it's the regulation that will take time to get in place, and they're sort of saying in that 15-year time frame. So our view and where our plans are is in the next 10 to 15 years, the dominant vehicles on the road will be autonomous vehicles. So there's a whole lot of things to work through in terms of policy changes, ethics that Brian mentioned. Just spend a minute on that in terms of the autonomous vehicle. It uses digital technology to actually match. I'll just spend a minute on this just in terms of the ethics and regulations. But the autonomous vehicle uses digital technology to identify all the images like pedestrians and other obstacles on the road. And when we looked at the research on what's happening in this space, the community would say if a car kills a pedestrian, our value system says it's the driver's fault. It's the default behaviour, and most of our legal systems around that. If an autonomous car kills a pedestrian, whose fault is it? And the default behaviour is, oh, it's the car manufacturer that put those algorithms in the car. But that then has implications on insurance and a whole lot of other legal situations. There's another band of research happening at the moment where we've actually been privy to seeing this research that's done out of some of the universities in the US, where if a pedestrian is crossing the road and there's a driver in the car, they make eye contact and they behave in a certain way. We've seen some trials run where the pedestrian's about to cross the road, looks at the car and it's a Google autonomous car with no driver. The pedestrian behaviour is different. They actually stop, they pause, they stop, start. Sometimes they walk around the back of the car. So there's a whole lot of other behavioural things that have been built into these algorithms to get us to a point where it's... I'm just giving you that as an example, but you can just multiply that by an order of magnitude and start guessing about some of the areas that are in there. We'll flip through regulations. Others to say a lot of the states are already... Cyber security is another area, particularly with threats to do with hacking. Just imagine in 10 years' time we've got most of the cars on the road are autonomous, 10 to 15 year time frame. If someone managed to hack into that, imagine the chaos and disruption that would be caused. So a lot of work is going into that security area. There's also quite a battlefield where the insurance companies, the car manufacturers, who owns the data and how is the data to be used. So a lot of regulatory work has to be done in that space as well. Probably touching up on the ethical challenges in terms of who do you blame, what's the behaviour of pedestrians. That has a lot of implications again in the insurance space. There's a lot of research happening in there. In terms of some of the legislation, some of the work being done in the manufacturers, even the insurance companies are doing a lot of work in this space where they're actually using data coming from telematics devices to bring in new opportunities in terms of the way they price insurance, so that it can be on, with the data that's then available with this technology, it'll be on use, time of day, your driving behaviour, how many times you use the brake, how many times you accelerate, and that will start to refine tailored offerings that will come up over the next 5 to 10 years in terms of insurance. There's already some of those offers in the marketplace overseas. I thought the other thing I'd touch on just before we go to questions, just give you a couple of thought starters. I'll stretch it, but if I say in the 10 to 15 range, which is not that far away, our planning and a lot of our strategy work is around saying that the majority of cars on the road will be electric vehicles. So as you plan what you're doing with your cars, and it's partly because the rate of progress in battery technology is, Moore's law and all these other laws have almost been thrown out of the thing because the accelerator on that rate of change is just enormous, to a point where you will expect an electric vehicle to drive from Melbourne to Sydney on one charge. Seems a bit far-fetched, but that's the rate of change that we're tracking at the moment. So the majority of cars will be electric vehicles. The majority of cars will be autonomous. So you just go to your app, or you have something already organised, the car turns up, takes you to the office, takes you to wherever you know, takes you to your Morris Provis meeting. You don't have to worry about all the parking congestion you have to worry about now. And it'll pick you up when you come back after you've had a refreshing lunch without worrying about any of the other things that go with that. The other thing that's part of the planning for the future is around ride sharing and car sharing. And you'll notice emerging companies like, for example, Airbnb, with what they've done, they've just said there's a whole lot of properties and houses that we can say are underutilised assets. Using Airbnb, that they don't have any assets tied up, they've just got a whole lot of smart technology to introduce a whole new business. You've already seen Uber do the same things really with underutilised assets such as privately owned cars. Uber's already in discussions and negotiations with some of the leading car manufacturers for the autonomous vehicles. So you can just imagine in that 10-year window that Uber will be offering driverless cars in competition to the ones that are being driven. Some of you may already be aware Uber's got Uber Food now as well as Uber Transport, and they're actually going around some geographies to well-known restaurants saying, in your quiet periods, we want to offer your fine dining experience at home. And what they're doing now is you go to your you have a food app in some locations, and you can get the fine dining meal organised in a certain window. Currently, a Uber vehicle or driver will deliver it to your home and you have that at home. So there's a lot of these emerging businesses that are out there saying, what are the underutilised assets and how can we put some smart technology around it? But car sharing and ride sharing will dominate in that 10 to 15 year range. And I think the other comment is really around the Internet of Things, just to think about that in the next 10 to 15 years, where if you visit places like Google, which I had the opportunity to do earlier in the year, they've got a whole lot of propositions to say every device in your home, your car, your workplace, in your pocket with your mobile phone will have computers in and they will all be connected. So your life in that 10 to 15 year range, according to Google, is you wake up, your alarm clock goes off, it tells the signal to the kitchen to get the toaster and coffee machine ready, you walk out into the kitchen, have your breakfast, is already prepared by the technology because all the machines talk to each other, you walk down, you don't have to go to the garage because the driver car's out the front to take you to your meeting or your office, and that all happens. There's a whole lot of issues, but it's normally not a technology restraint that enables most of this to happen. A lot of it will be, does it make sense? Is there a value proposition? Is the economy of scale right? And have we got the right policies and regulations in place to make sure it's safe? But if you look at companies in that area of where Google's operating, I had an opportunity to talk to some of the researchers saying, well, so between Melbourne and Geelong, why do you need a public transport connection in 10 years' time? Just explain a lot of things that Brian's saying, because people need different modes of transport. Cool. You won't need those because the autonomous car will pick all the people in Geelong up, they'll get to the freeway, they'll couple up as a batch, they'll bring them up the freeway and then they'll disperse to different parts of Melbourne and pick them up at the end of their day. So I'm sure that Google's a bit aspirational, but it's starting thinking about all the possibilities. Our world's definitely going to change over the next 15 years. But as long as we can get here on time with an autonomous car or driven car, that's okay. I might hand back to Brian, who'll cover some more of this other question, talk about the ideas.
Just to add to what Jess said, we've already got connected fridges, connected air conditioners, because you can actually turn on your air conditioner from using your mobile phone before you get home to make sure the house is cool or it's heated, or you can actually defrost the fridge or that sort of stuff already. So the connected home is on the list right now, and the sort of scenario Jeff talked about, I've seen videos of that too from Transurban, his old stamping ground. In fact, Scott Charlton, who's the Chief Executive of Transurban, has got a great video about how you apply that in the context of transport overall. And as Jeff said also, the connected home, Internet of Things and connected vehicles is going to be a threat and an opportunity. An opportunity to increase mobility, but will it be a threat to public transport? Will it actually question the need, as Jeff said, to have a train between Melbourne and Geelong because of the connected vehicles and platooning of vehicles which will effectively rival public transport? So there's some real issues for us in terms of planning. I see a few people shaking their head. I think you're probably right. There's still need public transport will be right here, but certainly there are going to be threats and opportunities. But just to finish a couple of slides on the World Congress, as Chair mentioned at the start, I'm also, apart from my day job at RACV, I'm also President of ITS Australia, and we have the ITS World Congress in Melbourne in October this year, 10 to 14. And as you can see, the theme is ITS Enhancing Livable Cities and Communities. That's off the back of Melbourne being voted the world's most livable city 6 times in the last decade, and in fact 5 times in a row in the last 5 years. So very much enhancing livable cities is the key that we've gone with. This is a worldwide congress. It's held every 3 years, every year, one in 3 between Asia Pacific, the Americas, and Europe. Vertico is the body in Europe, and there are ITS associations in all the countries of Europe, in the Americas, Canada, and throughout Asia Pacific, and of course we're part of Asia Pacific. We bid 5 years ago, a bit like the Olympics actually, that our friend was talking about before, bid 5 years ago, one up against Singapore, in fact they have it in Melbourne, in this year. So we've booked the entire convention centre in Melbourne. We've got probably about 5,000 delegates, 10 to 12,000 people through the door, and we've filled 85% of Jeff's shed. with the exhibition. So it's a massive exhibition of all the technology we've just been talking about from around the world. A great opportunity to actually experience what's going to happen in Melbourne. And we'll have our friends from all of those areas, the Americas, from Europe and Asia Pacific. Registration's open, in fact early bird just finished, and we have about 1,600 delegates registered already. And we have 85 days to go, but who's counting? So it's a big gig, and we've been working very hard at this. And as you can see by all the brands on that particular slide, most of the major companies around Australia and the world, and indeed the Australian government, Victorian government, Queensland government, New South Wales government, and many of the agencies like PTV and VicRoads, TCA, Transurban are already engaged as major sponsors and major exhibitors. So it's actually been a very successful project, in fact, in getting engagement within Australia, but also overseas, and we're looking forward to it immensely. If you'd like an opportunity, in fact, to visit the exhibition, please get in touch with me. I can arrange for day passes to get you into the exhibition. It'll be a great gig to have a look at. So I think we'll finish on that, and join Jeff and I happy to take any questions.
Thank you. That was very interesting. You talked about disruptive technologies. That's, I don't think fully appreciated that with disruptive technologies, half the people working in maybe the repair industry in Australia would disappear because there'd be no need. But the regulatory issue that you touched on, the US is having problems at the moment because it's like most countries, it's state-based legislation. So what you can do with a truck in Arizona, you can't pass over. So unless you can have uniform, it's going to be a great difficulty to embrace the technology throughout Australia or any other country.
Yeah, absolutely agree. And the NTC, the National Transport Commission I mentioned earlier, are a national body. They report in the federal system. They are working with all the state governments and RACV and our counterparts in the other states as well, who are major players. And the aim really is to come up with national regulations and legislative framework to make sure you get precisely what you talked about, or you don't get what you talked about in the states. That is, disharmony between the states. We're seeing each of the states, like South Australia had the trial last November, and they brought in interim regulations to enable that to occur on one of their freeways. We've now seen Queensland, New South Wales and Victoria talking about having trials as well. And state-based trials and interim regulations on a state basis are fine, as long as there's a national framework. Absolutely agree, and we're pushing very strongly for that. In fact, I'm part of the NTC reference group, in fact, is putting together these regulations.
I might just add one thing. In the US, more likely than not, I predict what will happen is a couple of the smaller cities in the US that are already in dialogue with some of the high-tech car companies will embrace having a fully autonomous environment. And that'll actually be a simpler transition in a small geographical patch than the challenges that will happen when you've got some autonomous cars and some manual cars. But you'll see some pilots happen in the next 5 to 10 years in the USA.
Sorry, just one other point that's very important. Whilst we do need a regulatory framework and consistency, what we don't want is regulations that get in the way. Because we've seen so many instances of regulations that get in the way. As long as the framework is clear, then there should be room for innovation in the private sector to make the best of that. So that's a delicate balance, but it's a really important issue.
When we come to a busy intersection, the traffic flows, When we come to a busy intersection, the traffic flow is governed by lights which are coloured. When we come to the road and we drive along the road, all the lane markings that I travel on anyhow are coloured white. Why don't we have a system whereby the road markings are coloured to indicate a speed? So the frame would say, just take a simple case, minimum speed coloured green, maximum speed coloured red, and intermediate speeds delineated by different colours. Thank you.
Use the picture. So you notice his name's Green.
maybe I'll revert back to the hat I used to wear in Vic Roads as a regional director for 8 years. I guess it would be a very complex system would be my initial thought. One, you try and minimise the amount of paint on the road because it actually does produce slippery surfaces, unless it's actually got special techniques in it. But that can be an issue for cyclists and motorcyclists. But secondly, I think having sort of a green, yellow, red type system, already we've got a fair bit of complexity, and with the density of traffic, in fact, you wouldn't see some of those lines. No. So I think it probably is an overly complex way of doing it. There's probably the better way of actually thinking about this is using technology, because there are now maps available. Vic Roads, in fact, has a published map which has all the speed limits on it. And a lot of the new cars coming on the system, in fact, in their navigation systems, have those speeds actually coded into their system. And you can get an alert system on your dashboard that shows whether you are going over the speed limit or not, automatically. Yeah. So you can do precisely what you said, but do it with technology. That's a better outcome.
I'm a great fan of Transurban, and I can't understand why we're not getting your number one priority of the RACV built. And obviously, if it's told, why can't we do it now?
I agree. I guess I'm a fan of Transurban as well. In fact, back in my gig when I was in Vic Roads, I managed, in fact, the construction phasing and traffic management plans for the building of CityLink with a counterpart in Transurban. But I guess Transurban's come up with the Western Distributor because it's actually connected to their system. So it is connected to CityLink. Makes sense in terms of leveraging their particular situation. But they may or may not be a bidder for the Metro Ring Road completion. But we want to see an independent process put out by government and make that competitive. I think the Transurban deal's been good, but there's a lot of people that have said, well, maybe there should have been a competitive process. So I think probably for the Metro Ring Road, yes, it will be a toll road, I absolutely agree, it won't be built without it, but I'd rather see a competitive system. Yep.
Excuse me, probably you've answered this, but a little bit of history on why the ring road was not completed at the time.
Okay, the ring road's probably had about a 15 to 20 year period of construction. It's currently being widened in several sections from 2 lanes each way to 3 lanes each way. The bit that's left is on the western side near the Teddy Whitten Bridge, but the section from basically around about Western Highway right around to the Plenty Road area has been widened already. There was a reservation east of Greensborough Highway, going back to before John Cain became the Premier. There's a reservation was there. The Cain government, in fact, removed the reservation because of the Green vote up in that area. So that's the issue we face. But whether it's actually a route that goes around connecting Greensborough and Ringwood, or the north-south route I mentioned earlier, either way it's going to be a tunnel. So the reservation in that sort of sense is no longer relevant. But I think it's pretty big cost and probably the difficulty of actually getting through the Warrandyte-Eltham area because of the conservation issues out there. That's why no government's taken on. But at least, as I said now, we've seen both the current government and the state opposition, Matthew Guy, make very positive comments about the Metro Ring Road completion.
I want to quickly add, I won't talk specifically about that road, but what you'll see is companies like Transurban, Vic Roads, a lot of the equivalents around Australia actually have quite sophisticated traffic modelling, quite sophisticated views of what the 10 and 15 year needs are in terms of places like the M2 in Sydney really needed 3 lanes when it was built. So they're all long-term planning with a lot of data and a lot of research behind them. The decision makers are basically politicians that have a much shorter term horizon, so that's your answer.
I was interested in your example, the traffic between Geelong and Melbourne. Now you get these automatic cars, that's what I call them, and you're faced with the problem of a big motor vehicle having one person sitting in it. How are you going to overcome that?
Your definition of a motor vehicle will change significantly. They're much smaller. So
yeah, I appreciate
you'll end up with capsules smaller than a mini miner with one person with an autonomous drive in some cases. Some of them will have a capacity for a dozen, and then they'll use their connectivity to actually couple up so it comes up as a platoon.
Thank you.
Golf clubs go.
I think you've got to leave the golf clubs at the golf course.
One thing I was rather surprised. I was rather surprised that you've never mentioned Park and Ride. Now we've got a perfect opportunity with the new Dandenong South bypass, the railway line from Moorabbin to the city, and we've got the St Kilda football ground. You know, areas like that could be used for Park and Ride, and you could get an extra express train on the third line which goes from Moorabbin to the city. Have you any comments on that?
Yeah, RACV has pushed Park and Ride for a long time now. As I mentioned earlier, in our on-track surveys, the key issue, the number one issue that came up every time, the lack of parking at railway stations. So you can deal with that by putting more parking at railway stations, but often the land in that area, is very scarce. And I mean, around the world, you see, park and ride systems outside major cities, about 15, 20 k out. And in fact, they're major systems with actually, with commuter trains or buses taking them into the city. We just never seem to embrace that in Australia, mostly because I think we've gone down the American model for transport planning, rather than maybe the European model. That's my observation.
Is that in a number of parts of the US, in particular in Virginia, they have the, if you like, the multi-occupancy lanes that are set up just imagine the freeway, and in Virginia, the one I've got in my head, there's like 8 lanes going in each direction. At peak hour, they are log jammed, and they just sit there and go along at less than 10 k an hour, but they are free. You can travel in the high speed or hot lanes in the middle, providing there is more than one person in the car. They will guarantee a minimum speed of 80 kilometres an hour, and all they do is vary the tariff. So at peak time, there's a variable tariff on that toll road that goes down the middle of that freeway, particularly in places where there's high net wealth income. They're not terribly bothered, they're happy to pay the extra tariff at peak hour to get in at 80 kilometres an hour. In those locations, the park and ride is almost an industry in itself, in that you can park at a certain location, you stand there like a bus stop, the next driver comes along, picks up a passenger and goes on the high speed lane for free. And they've got all these rules. If you actually get to one of those park and ride stations, you're not allowed to talk to the driver unless he invites you to talk. You've got to get off in the city where they drop you off, all that type of stuff. But there's a whole park and ride industry that's yet to come through Australia.
Thank you.
Jeff, what's the RACV thought on 0 or 0.2 alcohol limits?
That's why I've got Brian here.
We don't think that's appropriate. We think the current level limit of 0.05 is right. There's got to be a balance there in terms of community sort of behaviour and enjoyment and road safety. Certainly alcohol, along with mobile phones and speed, are the 3 key killers on our road system. But the alcohol degradation in performance, if you look at a graph from sort of BAC down here, blood alcohol content, and impact on the road system here, there's a gradual rise from 0 to 0.05 to at that point. Then it goes like that. So from 0.05 upwards, it used to be 0.08, in fact, in New South Wales and Queensland many years ago, before they saw the light. Victoria's always had 0.05. We think that's the right limit. The push for 0.02 by the current police traffic commissioner is a bit over the top.
Harry, to make it hard for people to drive home from the golf club after golf.
Well, from progress. There's an article in The Age, not so long ago, about peak time penalty, which they said would curb traffic. Would you be nearer to having something like that?
We oppose peak time congestion charging. Basically what we want, I alluded to it before in terms of the issue of vehicle taxation, which I can cover in the talk, but basically what we're saying is the current system of taxation on motoring is dysfunctional. We have a mixture of fuel excise at now 39.5 cents because it's been indexed by the current government, or the average version of it, so that's increasing. We have a bunch of federal and state taxes like import duties, sales tax, luxury car tax, and taxes on motoring. Now we're saying basically that's dysfunctional, and as Jeff mentioned earlier, with the advent of smarter vehicles, more efficient vehicles, electric vehicles, the actual take from those taxes on fuel excise, for example, is diminishing, and that's the revenue base for the government. So there's two problems. One, the charging system is inequitable. Two, the actual revenue base is diminishing. So we're saying there should be a total revision of that, and there should be what's called a road user pricing or road user charging system brought in, which charges based on mass, distance, time and location. And that therefore, if you travel in peaks, in fact you will pay a bit more. If you're travelling off peaks, you'll pay a bit less. If you're in country Victoria, people will say, oh, hang on a minute, we're going to charge you for how far I drive. I've got no option. But you're not in congestion, so you'll pay less than now. So it fixes the inequity, and in fact, all of the revenue from the charges must be dedicated back to fix the transport system. So that's the revenue side. So our view is that there should be a total review of the current taxes, not just the imposition of a congestion tax on top of what is already a dysfunctional system.
Some time ago, we had Lindsay Fox here as our speaker. He knows transport. Large ships are currently ploughing their way to Port Phillip, ploughing in spite of the deepening of the channel. Western Port must become the major port. We must have a tunnel under the head. There's a one under the English Channel. What are your thoughts on that?
Right. I think there's lots of other priorities way in front of that. It's a pretty adventurous and very, very expensive project. I think we're better off actually developing a second port for the future. The Port of Melbourne, I mean, some people talked about it's going to be out of capacity in 15 years. My view is that's rubbish. I spent part of my life actually working in the Port of Melbourne as well as the other gigs. And the plans we did really showed that the Port of Melbourne's got at least 25 to 30 years to go because they're expanding terminals already with the new Western terminal down at Webb Dock. So I think you're better off actually looking at a second port, probably Western Port Bay would be my view, rather than the other side, Bay West, which is on the agenda and currently being assessed by Infrastructure Victoria. So I think a second port and then getting actually upgraded the Dandenong rail line and also the Monash Freeway extended down to the new port at Hastings. In fact, it's probably a better solution than getting across the heads.
I just wondered if I could ask this.
I'm interested in your prognosis on electric cars and being big go within 15 years. I've got a magazine at home, American magazine, that says electric cars, their time is now. Dated 1953. So I asked if
Nice one.
cars currently use petrol, that's pollutants, that's why they want us to stop driving. Electric cars use electricity, they burn brown coal. Where do you think the power is coming from? And what's the chances of getting significant renewable energy power in the time frame that you're talking about? I just can't see what's coming. Even nuclear, I can't build them in 15 years, so even if we went that way, they're not going to be here by now.
I'm not sure the trend's being driven for environmental benefit. It's predominantly driven by the car manufacturers that already have had the research and the prototypes built. And if you look at the trend on the rate of change at which battery capacity is exponentially growing, all roads lead to most of the leading car manufacturers will have an offering that will be a fully electric car, and their view is that will dominate. So the environmental impact, I don't think, is a consideration that many of those have. What we're saying is, where do we need to fit RACV in terms of supporting what the future looks like, rather than making a judgment on what's right or wrong from the environment point of view. There's also quite rapid change and advancement in the solar power, but I don't think that will be a dominant source in the time frame that I'll talk about.
It's not listen, we don't.
I just wondered if I could ask this, what thought would you have about if I had my autonomous car driving down here to the Progress meeting and then just send it home, right? That's what you said, so we park there. But I go in the bar and I drink like 15 whiskies or something. I bring the car back, legally, where would I be if I was in the car? I wasn't actually driving it.
Well, first of all, your car wouldn't be parked, you'd be out doing another autonomous drive somewhere, and a different autonomous car can come pick you up. It doesn't have to be your autonomous car. It will be an autonomous car provided by some shared vehicle community or a vehicle, an Uber or one of those organisations. And you're not in control of the car when it's autonomous, so that's part of the legislative challenges of why it's taking longer rather than shorter.
One more question.
Just to briefly add, I mean, that is clearly one of the challenges that we had on the screen before. A number of challenges in the regulatory, ethical, and legal sense. That's one of them, which does need to be dealt with. We've had Volvo, for example, come out and say if there are any fatalities as of 2017 with their vehicles, they are accountable. It's a pretty brave call, I would have thought. But we'll need to sort of settle, is it the car manufacturer that encodes the stuff into the car, or is it the driver that actually is in the car that is accountable? That's one of the legal issues.
I might just add one comment to give you an idea of why I actually believe that 10 to 15 is realistic for autonomous cars. If you go to the more progressive organisations like a Tesla, despite the issue they have with that accident, their design people are able to overnight download autopilot to every, what they did not recently is nominated a certain number of freeways in Palo Alto. Any Tesla driver, if you go into Palo Alto, there's a lot of Tesla drivers, they downloaded overnight the software to make all their vehicles able to use autopilot on those nominated roads. They ran that for a trial period of about 4 weeks. They then disabled it. All that data was collected and goes straight back to the design team. So the feedback loop between what's happening on the road and the design team is just such an accelerated rate. That's why they're saying 5 years. Our view is the legislative side will slow that down, but it's not going to be a technology longer that'll be an inhibitor.
We're out of time, so if you have any other questions, perhaps you could speak to Brian and Jeff after John has made it.
You're not going to get my question.
No, you just have to ask.
We'll make sure we answer it before we go.
Well, thank you very much. It was an extremely interesting talk. As at my age, there are only a few pleasures left in life, and driving a car is one of them. So what about sex? As regards your predictions, I think they may have been on par with Roger's predictions. Anyway, thank you very much for this fascinating talk, and